Good morning all. I hope you people are safe in your homes. Today I Jatin Ambasna will be starting Hibernate Unit 6 of our Advanced Java subject in GTU. So let's begin with this. Professor Tarunum Bloj will also be accompanying me afterwards in next lectures. So today we will be starting with the introduction of Hibernate, and I will also show you how you can make an application using Hibernate. That application will be desktop based application. Along with that, I will also show you how to make okay, so I think it is streaming now. Okay, it's going well. Fine. Sorry for the interruption. I thought the lecture has not started the streaming. Okay, fine. So today I'll introduce you people to the Hibernate, and let's start with what is Hibernate. Then we will go on to see some key features of Hibernate, some advantages of Hibernate. Then we will also see that how to make a particular small JDBC program, and then how to make an Hibernate program. So you'll be able to see the difference in the program itself. I'll also upload those programs for you people so that you can run it on your machines. I'll also show you what settings to be done when you run it on your machines. So basically, what is Hibernate? Hibernate is an object relational mapping tool. It is an ORM solution for Java developers. Yes. Now, what is object relational mapping? That is the core idea behind the evolvement of Hibernate. So basically, it's an open source persistent framework. Hibernate is an open source persistent framework that was created by Gavin King in 2001. Open source is, most of Java APIs are open source. And persistent framework, you would have heard this persistent term first time during your third semester in DBMS subject. Basically, what is DBMS? DBMS is nothing but a system that can store data persistently, or it persists the data. And what is a persistent data? Data that does not get removed automatically until you remove it on your own. That is a persistent data. This is a simple layman definition of persistent data. So this is whole framework that deals how to handle the persistent data. So basically, it is very powerful. It is high performance. Yes, high performance, by meaning high performance, I can guarantee you that it has been used in many big companies. It is the backbone of many big companies. It is object relational persistence, and query service is the main two motives behind using it for any Java application. That Java application can be, yes, desktop based application. It can be also a web based application or an enterprise level application. What basically does it do? In simple layman terms, we can say it simply maps Java classes to database tables. Yes. So the idea is to store the objects, Java objects, directly into relational tables, and also taking care of Java data types and converting them to SQL data types and vice versa. Yes, so this is one of the biggest challenge, to control the data types, to convert the data types to and fro when the data goes from an application to a database. So this is the biggest challenge of managing the data types, and Hibernate takes care of all these things. So that makes application development pretty much easier for developers. So yes, it relieves the developers from 95% of tasks related to data persistence. So I hope by this slide you would have got an idea what is ORM and what is Hibernate, just a small idea of it. So let's go ahead and see how actually, or let's visualize how Java application or Java objects are transformed to RDBMS. Basically, Hibernate sits in between traditional Java objects and database, and what it does is, through this ORM, through this tool, through this mapping tool, Hibernate saves the Java objects directly into RDBMS. It can be any RDBMS. So it handles all the work of persisting. Persisting means to save the data, the objects directly into the database, and to also provide API to access those objects. You can anytime access those objects. You can directly delete those objects by single command. Yes, so you don't need to write a long query to access particular row or to delete a particular row. Yes, you can consider a particular row of a table mapped to an object, yes, to a Java object. So those OR mechanisms are very much important, and ORM is a very good tool for Java developers to directly persist Java objects into the database. So what are the advantages? Let's see some of the advantages, then we will start the actual programming. Basically, it helps you mapping. It takes care of mapping Java classes to database tables, and that too using XML files. That is, you don't need to write any Java code. In JDBC you would have seen there are 5 particular steps that you need to take care of, right? And there are lots of Java code to make queries that can put data inside it, and then those queries are fired onto the tables through the Java program. But here what it will happen is, all the configuration related information, all the configuration related tasks will be taken care by Hibernate using simple XML files. Configuration related information means database connection, then table mapping onto the Java class. All these things will be taken care of by Hibernate using simple XML files. You can also see, you will also see that it can also be taken care of by annotations. So it provides very simple APIs for storing and retrieving Java objects to and from the database. Yes, so it is a whole lot of API in itself. And if there is a change in database or in table, then you just need to change the XML file. Yes, simply changing the XML file changes the underlying database. Previously, when developers used to make JDBC based applications, what happened is, whenever they change the underlying database, they have to change the whole program, because many databases do not comply with each other's syntaxes. So that was the biggest issue. So here, if you change the database, whole database changes. You just need to change the XML file. That is one of the biggest advantage of Hibernate. It abstracts away unfamiliar SQL data types. Yes, many SQL data types are unknown to Java developers, or they are not used to with those types. So Hibernate provides a direct mapping between these two, and you don't need to remember the SQL data types. You just know Java data types. It will take care. You just know on which SQL type to be mapped. That's it. You can complete your application. So it provides a way to work around familiar Java objects. You are familiar with some particular data types, not all. You are familiar with Java data types, that's fine. You will be able to program it. Another thing is, one of the biggest advantages, it does not require an application server to operate. If you consider EJBs, Enterprise Java Beans, then it requires an application server. Till now we have seen technologies like servlets, JSPs, which do not require application servers. Yes, those run on servlet engines. Tomcat is one of our servlet engine. So using Tomcat you can run the Hibernate related web applications also. Yes, so that is one of a very good advantage of Hibernate. It does not require a full-fledged application server support to operate its application. It manipulates complex associations of objects of your database. So complex associations like one to many, many to many, these kind of associations that we use in databases, all those can be handled with the help of Hibernate configurations. So it's pretty much easy in Hibernate. It also minimizes database access with smart fetching strategies. It uses caches. 2 levels of cache are being used. So we'll further see in next lectures how this cache work. What is a cache? We'll go deep into that also. And it provides simple querying of data. Yes, it has got its own HQL, that is Hibernate query language. So let's see what kind of databases are supported. Hibernate supports almost all of the databases, almost all, like DB2, MySQL, Postgres, Frontbase, Oracle, MS SQL Server, Sybase, Informix, and many more. So what you need to do is you just need to have a simple Hibernate jar file. You don't need a different types of code for all these types of database. If you change your database from one database, say for example Oracle to MySQL, then in that case you just need to change the configuration files, XML files, and that's it. That is done. So now let's see what is Hibernate Framework. It is a Java framework. It simplifies the Java application development and it helps you interact with the database. It helps an application to interact with the database. Yes, it is open source. It is lightweight, as I told you before. It does not require a full-fledged application server. Yes, it is very much lightweight. A jar file simply works. ORM, it is an ORM tool, and it implements the specifications of Java Persistence API for data persistence, that is for storing and retrieving data. So what is an ORM tool? ORM tools allow us to simply access or easily access, create and manipulate data. And it's a programming technique basically. So it maps the object to data stored in the database. Yes, so the whole object is mapped onto a table and that object is directly stored inside that table. So that is a new kind of technique. You need to know what are its methods that can save, that can retrieve the objects from tables, right? So that's why it's a new programming technique. So it's like a Java application has got objects, a Java object obviously, and this object, with the help of ORM, that is the Hibernate, which is Object Relational Mapping tool, it stores with that help of ORM into the database. Yes, ORM tool internally uses JDBC API. That's a different thing. ORM also needs, it's not like that you simply use ORM and yes, you can connect to database. You also need to have the JDBC jar file for a particular database that you want to connect. So if you want to connect to Oracle database, you need to have that particular jar file in your application. If you want to connect to MySQL database, you need to have that particular jar file in your application or in your application class path. What is JPA? Java Persistence API. It is nothing but a specification that provides some standards for ORM tools and functionalities. It is in itself a big API specifically for persisting Java objects, and it is available in javax.persistent package. There are lots of classes and interfaces that we will see afterwards. So let's see some of the advantages of Hibernate. Let's again continue with the advantages. It has got lots of advantages. Like as we saw before, it is open source and lightweight. So it is open source under GPL license and lightweight in terms you need only the Hibernate jar files. You include Hibernate jar files in your application and that's it, you have got the Hibernate support. Fast performance because of the cache that it uses internally. Yes, it uses 2 levels of cache, that is first and second level. By default the first level is enabled. We will see further in next lectures when the second level can also be used. Third one is database independent query is there. So as I told you before, it uses HQL, Hibernate query language, which is object oriented version of SQL. So if you use this HQL and your underlying database is different or you change the underlying database, then there is no issue at all. You just need to change the configuration file. You don't need to change the code where you have written the HQL. Whereas in case of SQL, you need to change the SQL. Let's visualize that in terms of a diagram. So basically why this happens? Because it generates database independent queries. Queries which are independent of the underlying database. It is not specific to a specific database vendor. Okay, now let's see. So basically you don't need to worry about specific database queries and its syntax. Okay, so before Hibernate, what you used to do, if in a project you change the SQL query, then if you change the database, then you need to change the SQL query. In that terms you need to change the program. So if there is application which stores Java object using JDBC driver and using that JDBC driver, it uses some SQL to store that data into Oracle database. Now if you change, let's suppose for example PostgreSQL database, then yes, you need to change the SQL also. This particular older SQL will not work. So in that case what happens is you need to change this Java application from scratch. So yes, that was the biggest issue. You needed to change the whole SQL part from whole application. So that does not happen in Hibernate. That is the biggest advantage of Hibernate, because it generates database independent queries. Some more advantages are automatic table creation. It can create table for you. If you just mapped it, it does not find it there. Okay, it will create the table for you from the class itself. So it can automatically create tables, no need to create it manually. And complex join queries can be very much simplified. Fetching data from multiple tables is very easy. As I told you before, it also simplifies the mapping, that is one-to-one, one-to-many mapping, those kind of mappings that we have seen in database in third semester. Those kind of mapping relationships are also very much easily simplified. And it provides query statistics and database status, which is very much useful for a developer. So let's see the Hibernate architecture now. Hibernate architecture has many objects which are new to you. It can include persistent objects, it will include session factory, it will also have transaction factory. From the name you can see the object, persistent object, is the object that is to be saved into the database or to be accessed from the database. Session factory will help you to create sessions for connecting to the database. This, take care, this session is different from the HTTP session that you have learned in HTTP servlet. That is an HTTP servlet class. This is a session factory class, so both are different. Okay, and then comes the transaction factory that provides you the support of transactions. It also has got connection factory, which helps manage the connection pool. Session object is there, one particular session for one connection. You can consider this session as to be the connection object that we used to do, or that we used to get in JDBC program. Transaction object, yes, one particular transaction for one application or many transactions in an application. So Hibernate architecture is basically categorized into 4 layers depending on all these things. One is the Java application layer, where you code all the Java codes, where you code all the Java classes and objects, and business layer is there. There is Hibernate Framework layer, which provides all the API for ORM, and you have backend API layer. Backend API layer is supporting layer, which provides you the layer like database connectivity of vendor specific database. Then there are different APIs used in like JTA, JNDI, obviously JDBC. All these come into this backend API layer. And then comes the database, actual database layer. So you can see there are 4 layers. One is Java application layer, then is Hibernate Framework layer. So this is application layer. This particular part is the Hibernate Framework layer. This is the backend API layer, and this is the final database layer, the core or the raw database. So this is Hibernate architecture divided into 4 different layers. You can also use this diagram for drawing the Hibernate architecture in your GTU exams. Yes, this kind of questions are being asked. Explain Hibernate architecture with all of its parts. Now let's see one by one objects. You can see there are different objects available over here. Session factory is there, transaction factory, connection provider is there, session is there. Java application stores a persistent object through this session via this internal API, let's say JDBC API, directly into the database. So, and there is a transaction layer if you want to provide transaction support. So let's one by one learn each and every configuration object. Okay, so in configuration object, it is the first Hibernate object that you create in any Hibernate application. Configuration is the one which provides database connection, and it is created only once during initialization. It is like creating the database connection and it's like loading the database driver and getting the connection in your JDBC program. So it is similar to, you can consider it as similar to that. So it provides two key components: database connection and class mapping setup. So database connection is handled through the configuration files. You can either provide Hibernate Properties file, Hibernate.properties, or you can even provide Hibernate.cfg, that is for configuration.xml file. We will see further in the program how these files are designed. And there is class mapping setup, which is nothing but a connection between Java class and database tables. So these two components are provided by the configuration object. Then comes SessionFactory object. So SessionFactory object is used to create a session factory or used to create a session and give it to our Java application. It basically, configuration object creates SessionFactory object, and which in turn configures the Hibernate. So this SessionFactory allows you to instantiate a session depending on the configuration that you have created for the underlying application. So if a configuration is for a MySQL database, so that kind of session factory object will create that kind of session which can get connected to MySQL database. So in that way, configuration object, you can see now the whole chain has started. From configuration object. It gives you session factory object. Session factory object gives you a session object, and now you can see, and further you will see that session object is the main thing main object that helps you do lot of operations in Hibernate. Now what is basically session factory object? It's a thread safe object, and yes, it is used by all the threads of an application. So it's a thread safe object. So I hope you know what is a thread safe object. Only one thread can access it at a time. Yes, it is a heavyweight object. Heavyweight object in terms, it needs many things to get created, and it is directly responsible for getting all the sessions. So it is mainly created during application startup and kept for later use. So there is one session factory object per database. If you are using separate databases, then obviously you will need multiple session factory objects. So one session factory object is needed per database. Remember this thing, okay? And there is a separate configuration file for it. So if you want to support, if you want to, say for example, create an application that stores its data into multiple databases just for the sake of data, let's say the security purpose, then in that case you need multiple session factory objects. Now let's come to the main hero of Hibernate application, that is the session object. Session object is used to get a physical connection. Yes, so this is the main object that directly deals with the database or the table on which you are performing the operations. It is very lightweight as compared to SessionFactory. It is lightweight. It is instantiated each time and interaction is needed. So for example, if you want to fire a select query just to retrieve some data, you create a session and that's it, you close it afterwards. Now at some point of time you want to edit the data, that is you want to update it, so at that time then you use this session. You again create a session object, you retrieve the session object from the SessionFactory, and then you update the table and then you close it. So it is very lightweight. Lightweight in the terms, many threads in our application may use it. For example, a user, let's consider a web application user. So a web application user, let's say there are two web application users using simultaneously. One is viewing his cards, let's say shopping cart, and another is editing his shopping cart. So both are accessing the shopping cart data or shopping cart object at a time. One is just retrieving it, one is updating it. So you see, lightweight objects come into picture at those times when there are multiple threads. There is a possibility of multiple threads to do simultaneous operations on same type of object. So persistent objects are saved and retrieved through session. We will see how just by single command you save whole object to the table. You don't need to write a big query to insert or put all the data into it and then you need to fire it. No, that's it. We'll be easily be able to save a whole object to the database table. And yes, it should not be kept open for a long time because database, as we know, database connections are costly. There are limited number of connections on database part also. You saw there was a fourth layer, that is database layer. So database layer also has a limitation of number of connections. So obviously the session object will be a physical connection, so you should not keep it open for a long time. And it is not usually thread safe, that's why it should not be kept open. It should be created and destroyed as needed, as and when needed in your code. Next comes the transaction object. Transaction, what is transaction? Transaction, logically speaking, it's a single unit of work, right, within the database. And most of the RDBMS support transactional functionality nowadays. And it is handled by a transaction manager. In Hibernate, this transaction support is provided by transaction manager and transaction objects from JDBCA and JTA, okay, Java Transaction API, that is. And yes, this is an optional object. So in the program that we see today, you maybe will not use it much. This is an optional object needed when you want to have transaction support, and instead you can choose managing transaction in their own application code. So this is not a compulsory object to run a Hibernate program. So next object is query object. So how many objects we have seen till now? That is, one is configuration object, then it was SessionFactory object, then came the session object, then came the transaction object which was optional, and now comes the query object. So this is the fifth object. So let's start with what is a query object. It is a very simple object. Query object is basically it uses SQL or HQL strings. Yes, and for what these strings are used? To retrieve data from the database and also to create objects. Yes, we'll see some part of the strings. We need to write some strings. We need to write SQL queries in some part. Not full SQL queries will be needed, but some part of SQL query will be needed when we create query objects that you will see while making the programs. And a query instance, when is a query instance used? Basically it is used to bind query parameters. Yes, these parameters are very much important. You use these parameters in JDBC programs. In prepared statement you have used parameters, so you have used the prepared statement to bind this parameters, right? This query instance can bind parameters into it, and it can also limit the numbers of rows returned from a particular execution, and finally to execute the query. So these are some of the functionalities that for which the query instance is needed, query object is needed. And the next object is the criteria object. Criteria object is basically used to create and execute object-oriented criteria queries. Yes, so you will see in when you need to run complex queries, or when you need to apply multiple criteria to run a particular query, at that time this criteria object will be very much helpful to us. Okay, so these six objects, yes, with 6 objects. The first was the configuration object, then came the SessionFactory object, then came the session object, then transaction object, then query object, and the criteria object. Now after learning the 6 objects, let's go to Hibernate configuration. As I told you before that Hibernate just by writing configuration files, simple XML files, you can avoid Java code for getting connections and all those things, for configuring the database connectivity and all those part. We'll see how that configuration file is also there. So Hibernate requires to know in advance basically where to find the mapping information. And why this mapping information is required? Basically to define how the Java classes are related to the database tables, or how the Java classes are mapped onto the database tables. So Hibernate requires a set of configuration settings related to database and other parameters also, and all this information is supplied using Java properties file, that is Hibernate Properties, or as an XML file, that is hibernate.cfg.xml file. So we'll be using this XML file for our program that we see further. And there are dialects also. These are the properties, these are the dialects, these are the properties that we use in our configuration file, that is in hibernate.configuration file. You will use these particular properties. The first one is the dialect, then comes the connection.driver class, connection.url, connection.username, and there are many more. Let's see. Dialect is basically, it helps you generate appropriate SQL according to the chosen database. So it selects a particular dialect to interact with the underlying database. That dialect needs to be specified, as we need to specify the connection string in JDBC program, as we needed to specify the database name the driver name in the JDBC program. Here we need to specify the Hibernate dialect for selecting the for communicating with the underlying database. Then comes the JDBC driver class name, then URL, then the username. Other properties are password, that is the actual database password. Then the pool size of the connection pool size, it limits the number of connections that can be used in the Hibernate connection database pool. So and in the end it comes the auto commit mode. It allows auto commit mode to be used for a particular connection with this property. So now let's see an example of Hibernate ORM mapping property file, that is the configuration file. So ORM mapping is defined in an XML document, and this mapping language is Java centric, that is meaning this mapping is constructed around persistent class declaration. Yes, so let's take an example of a student XML file. You saw that I had named configuration as hibernate.cfg.xml. Yes, that was Hibernate configuration. This is OR mapping file. So we'll also see the example of Hibernate configuration file further in the program. Right now we are saying Hibernate OR mapping file. In this OR mapping file, this mapping file is used to map a particular database table onto our Java class. Yes, you can see this is a Hibernate mapping file, and it also has got a Hibernate mapping main element, that is a root element. After doc type, this is the root element, Hibernate mapping. In Hibernate mapping, we specify the mapping of different classes onto the tables of the database. So there is, you can see there is one class definition which has got a name, whole package name is specified, for example com.mypackage.student, that will be the package, and this is student is the class name. That student class is mapped onto a table called student into the database. There is an ID, or we can say there is a primary key. The role property of student class is mapped onto the primary key of student table. There is a generator class assigned to it. We will see further what are generator classes, which kind of other generator classes like native and other can also be assigned to it. And there are various properties defined for a particular class. You can see there are property names, okay, student name, that is stud name, and branch. Fine. So this property element, it allows us to map the Java class property onto a particular column of a table. Now here the column names are not specified, column attribute itself is not specified, because here we have to assume that the name of the property of the Java class, student class, property names are similar or same as that of the column names of the student table. So in that case, it is optional if you don't provide the column name. It considers it to be similar. So Hibernate OR mapping is an XML document. It has got an Hibernate mapping root element, and it has also got a class element that we saw. Then it has got in class element, it has got class name, and name attribute of the class element provides the name of the class, and the table attribute provides the database table name. It specifies the database table name. So this is a particular mapping of a Java class to database table. So this is the main core, object relational mapping. This is the main core of Hibernate. Then comes the ID element. It maps unique ID attribute to the primary key. So name attribute of the ID element is nothing but the property inside the class. So this role is the name of the variable, instance variable of student object or student classes object. Then comes the generator element within the ID element. It basically it is used to generate primary key values automatically, and class attribute can have various elements inside it can be assigned. It can also be increment, elo, sequence, native, and many more are there. You will see it further. Then comes the property element. Property element is nothing but a Java class property mapped onto the column into the database table. Name attribute specifies the property of the class. So you can see these all attributes, that is the name attribute of class, then name attribute of ID, then name attribute of property. These all attributes specify the properties of a Java class. And we have not specified the names of columns, we have not specified the name of the primary key. So here we assume that all these names of these columns are same as that of the properties of the Java class. Only the table name has to be specified. That is not optional, that is compulsory. Yes. And yes, there are these three attributes inside the property element. One is the name attribute, which shows the property of the class. Then comes the column attribute, which shows the column name of the particular database table name. Sorry, column of the database table. Here we have not provided it because both will be same. And then there can be a third attribute called type. So it holds the Hibernate mapping type. Basically it helps in converting a Java data type to SQL data type. Okay, so then comes Hibernate annotations. So this part, from this part on, we'll continue in next lecture, that is Hibernate annotation. But let's go to a program. Let's see how a JDBC program works and how a Hibernate program works. I'll also upload it in our portal so that you can access it from there. See, I have created various applications over here, and let's see what is a basic JDBC app first, then we'll see how a Hibernate app works. Okay. You see, this is JDBC app 1. Oh, yeah, okay. You see, this is JDBC app 1. Here, what is happening is, in this JDBC app, this is the JDBC programs package, and this is the main program that we are going to run. Okay. So let's see the JDBC app 1 class, as this is a simple application which runs on command line. Here we are using main inside this class. You see, this is not a servlet, this is a simple class, so we'll run it here itself without any server. And see, these are the various steps that you need to take care of. First is to load the driver, second is to get the connection. Remember this URL, check this URL properly. This is JDBC:MySQL. So MySQL is the vendor, JDBC is the protocol that we are using. Localhost is the server name. This is the port number of our MySQL database. This sample DB is the database name. Root is the username, and there is no password. We have not set any password. So basically that's why it is an empty string. So the second step was to get the connection. Now once you get the connection, you create a statement and you execute a query afterwards onto that particular statement and retrieve a result set. Once you retrieve the result set, you can check whether there are rows returned inside it. If yes, then you can iterate over it and then you can see the output. So I will show you the table that I have created in this phpMyAdmin. Let me go to the database. This is the sample database. Yes, you can see the sample database, sample DB. In sample DB there is this table called employee. If you browse it, then you will see there are 3 rows inside it, and these are the columns of it: ID, first underscore name, last underscore name, and salary. Okay, let me make you one thing clear to you people. I'll be using the same database and same table for both the programs, that is the JDBC program and also the Hibernate program. Okay, so let me show you how I run a particular JDBC program and access this data. Okay, so continuing with this, first thing was to load the driver, second thing was to get the connection, third step was to create the statement, fourth step was to execute query and retrieve the result set, and the fifth step was to iterate over it and then close the connection and then close the statement object and result set object also. So now let's run this particular file. So once I run this file, let's see what happens. This is the output. Over here you can see the output. So the output, it shows me the output, the same data that we had seen in the table using phpMyAdmin. Okay. Okay, so now let's see how. Okay, now let me show me one more thing. See here in default package I have provided this MySQL connector.jar. This is a JDBC app, so we don't need a lib folder as it is required in a web application. So in default package I have provided the MySQL connector jar. In this JDBC programs package I have provided this the program that runs, that gets the connection and retrieves the data, and that's it. So this is a simple JDBC app. Now let's see a JDBC app that is based on Hibernate. Okay, so you see in this app, in default package along with this connector jar file, I also require 2 more files. One is this Hibernate Configuration.xml and employee.hibernate mapping. HBM means Hibernate mapping. So employee.hbm.xml. So let me make you clear. This employee refers to an Hibernate mapping. This file refers to an Hibernate mapping of an employee object onto the employee table. Yes, let me once again show you the table. Check this table out. This is employee table in sample DB database, and also let me show you the column names: ID, first name, last name, salary. So let me open this. In this Hibernate, first here you declare the XML, then you declare the doc type, that is Hibernate mapping doc type. You provide the DTDs, and then in Hibernate mapping, you see this is the root element in this XML. Then there is a class. Only one class is defined right now, so you can see there is only one class definition inside this Hibernate mapping file. So that class name is com.employee. Yes, you can see the package over here. Sorry for that. Okay, you can see the package over here, com. If you open this package, there is an employee class, employee.java. Okay, so this, along with this package name, you specify the class name and then you specify the table name. You can see the case is maintained over here, and there is a meta element which defines the class description. Okay, then there is this ID element which defines the ID and its type and the column. So here the column name and the class property name is same. Okay, so let me show you the class also. So this is the class, employee class. You can see there are basically there are 4 private properties inside this employee class. So this employee class has 4 properties, and for each property there are 2 getter and setter methods. So 2 for ID, 2 for first name last, and 2 for last name, and 2 for salary. And you can see these properties are private, whereas the methods are public. And yes, it has also got 2, you can see there are 2 constructors. One is default constructor, no argument constructor, which we need to provide, which is compulsory over here. This is optional part. It has got a parameterized constructor where 3 parameters are being passed. Okay, so this is the employee class, and I have also specified the query over here that will be helpful to create the employee table. You can see this ID is integer, it is not null, and it is auto increment. Then comes the first name, which is varchar size 45, null can be there. Last name varchar 45 size, and salary, which is int, and ID is the primary key. So this is our employee class that we need to map onto an employee table, right? So let's map this using HBM. You can see first name, last name, salary. Over here, first name, last name, salary. You can see F is small, N is capital, L is small, N is capital, S is small case, ID is small case. So the case is to be maintained here, F small, N capital, L small, N capital, S small, and the column names are specified, the types are specified. Type string, string, and int. Here also you can see in ID the type is specified, and the generator class is native. So this is a particular class mapping onto a employee table of the database. Now this was ORM file. Now let's see the configuration file. This configuration file, Hibernate configuration file, also has got various things like SessionFactory. In SessionFactory you specify the properties like Hibernate dialect, Hibernate connection driver class, connection.url, connection.username, connection.password, and the resource for mapping onto a particular table. So if there are multiple classes or multiple resources, you can provide over there or multiple mappings over here. You see, this is the dialect that is used to communicate with the MySQL. Then comes the driver class name. Okay, then comes the connection URL. You can see this is the same as that we had used in our JDBC application. username, and there is no password. So you can see this is an empty property, empty element. So this is a configuration file, this is the persistent class, this is the Hibernate mapping. So all this Hibernate mapping, configuration file, and your JDBC driver file, jar file are in default package, and this employee.java, that is the class file, is in this com package. And then let's see the main class. In this main class there are multiple things we have to take care. So in this JDBC app 1 Hibernate, we will be accessing the database, and in main method, let's see what we are doing. We are using a factory, we are using a variable called factory, which is of data type SessionFactory. Okay, so this factory variable will be assigned an object by calling this create SessionFactory. Let's assume right now that this create SessionFactory method provides you a factory object, and if anything goes wrong, that it throws an throwable, so we can show the error. So if nothing goes wrong, then we simply list the employees. In the previous JDBC application also, we just use the select query, right? So once in list employees, we will see what happens. Through this factory, you open a session and you get a session object. We are not using transaction right now, so it is null. Now we start using transaction by saying session equal to begin transaction. So this begin transaction will provide you a transaction object. It will start a transaction. Then you say session.create query. In this query, you simply write from employee, and then you say dot list. So this list method will be equivalent to firing the query, and that will fire the query and retrieve the result, and that result will be put into a list. So you see, this list database is a Java, list type is the Java data type, whereas in previous JDBC application, what you get is a result set, which is a particular row, but instead here you get a list. So list is an Java data type, right? So it's very easy to iterate over it. You just need to have an iterator. From employees, you get the iterator, employees.iterator, and by using its hasNext method, you check whether this is an object or not. If there is an object, that simply you say iterator.next. So this next method also works as going on to the next object of the list. So you see, this third part of for loop has not been there, it is empty, because this next creates effect of pointing the pointer of the list to the next object also, and providing the current object. So once the next method returns the current employee object, it will have to be cast, and then the employee object is retrieved. And once an employee object is retrieved, you simply use its method names, first name, last name, and get salary. So let me run this, and you will see the output is similar to the previous output. The only thing is first name, last name, and salary. These three things have been added, right? These three strings have been added. So this was just a sample to show you how a JDBC application works and an Hibernate based application works. In next sessions, we'll go deep into Hibernate applications, Hibernate based web applications, and what is the difference between a JDBC web application and Hibernate web application. So the next sessions will be taken by my colleagues, and for today we'll end this session, and let me enable the comments. If you have any comments, let's see if any comments are there. Okay, Okay, so let's see whether you people have any comments or not. I have 5 minutes time for your comments. So I've enabled the comments. Now you can start commenting. We have 5 minutes time for this. I can see 34 people are watching, so any one of you can start commenting. Okay, there is one comment. If we specify the ID tag in Hibernate XML file, which is to specify the primary key relationship, right? So okay, so if it's like if we specify the ID tag in Hibernate XML file, which is to specify the primary key relationship, right? Yes, that's correct. So ID tag is specifically used to represent a primary key. You cannot use any other column inside it because it has got various types of generators. We will see further in next lectures how generators are being used, what are generators, how different generators work, and what kind of generator to be assigned to a particular ID when you are using that particular key. So yes, you are right. Okay, so then why don't we need to specify that column again in property tag? Specifically, yes, that ID tag itself is for the primary key column. So once you define the primary key column, I can also say that ID element is a special element. So if we consider a simple table, a primary key is a special column as compared to other columns. Similarly, that ID element is a special element in this Hibernate mapping file, which maps the primary key column onto a particular one particular you can say the property of our Java class. Yes, we don't need to specify that column again in property tag because that ID element is specifically provided by Hibernate for this particular purpose only. I hope I have solved your query, Arman. Any other query? Yes, Taranam, that's right. You can keep the property name same as the column name, and if not kept, then you need to specify both the names. Okay. So I think there are no more queries. So let's close the session now, and we'll continue. Taranam will continue the next session on another day. So let's end the advanced Java session today, and I hope it was informative for you people. Thank you. Let me stop the streaming.